Let me give you guys a sales framework. And why do we say framework versus a script? Well, whenever we use scripts, it tends to kind of put you into this position of, oh, I have to follow this step by step. And the best sales calls are always calls that are fluid and don't follow a structure, right? Because you want to have a conversation. When it comes to sales, you want to have a conversation. You don't necessarily want to be kind of pigeonholed into doing one thing the same way every single time. Now, sometimes, depending on what you're selling, that might be the case. So I'm not going to say like that's the case for every single sales call you'll ever take. But what I will say is that if you run a service, you probably are going to have prospects that have a little bit different problems. They might come up with a little bit different objections. And so that's why frameworks work so well, is that we can pivot to the framework to follow the conversation versus having to follow a direct script. Let me walk you through it a little bit. The first thing is a little something called frame, okay? Now, of course, I think most sales professionals say, oh yeah, you have to build rapport first. Rapport is not built in the first 30 seconds of the call, the first minute of the call where you're like, oh, where are you from? How old is your grandmother? That's not rapport. That's not where trust is built, right? Trust is built throughout the call, understanding their problem fully, and then being able to diagnose it and be able to come up with a solution at the end that will help them get to their goal. That is where trust is built on a sales call. Now, when we talk about frame, okay, that's kind of like where things kick off with the call. Maybe we do like a small little bit of rapport, but normally rapport for me is like, oh, where are you calling in from? Oh, okay, cool, Detroit. I'm actually from Detroit, crazy. Anyway, still got 30 minutes for our call today, right? And that's where we kick things off. And so the first thing that I'm normally going to bring up is going to be time allocated to the call. So if you guys have a 30-minute call in the books, 15-minute call in the books, 45 minutes, whatever your time frame is for the call, just ensure that they don't have another meeting coming up or that they have a hard deadline before the call ends, something like that. Because there's nothing more frustrating than getting halfway through your discovery and then being like, actually, hey man, can we wrap this up? I actually have to hop off the call. So make sure we put them in a position of like, they're actually going to be there for the full 45 minutes or however long your duration is. From there, I like this framework as far as setting the frame of the call. And so when we're setting the frame of the call, think of this as like, here's the guidelines for how the conversation is going to go. Now, we do this to win leadership position, and this is something that if you're not used to doing, make sure you practice. I remember when I first started setting frame, it was so chunky, it was not fluid at all. So I had to take time and practice this over and over and over again. I had to write it down, and now it just kind of rolls off the tongue. So how I set frame is typically how these calls best. Now, I like that opening line, typically how these calls best, because it's not a, this is how the call is going to go. This is typically how I find them to run best. And you can get a lot of buy-in simply by changing a little bit of that terminology. Sometimes people will set frame as like, hey, this is how the call is going to go. Not a huge fan of that. I want them to have buy-in to the call. I don't want them to feel jaded in the first thing that I say. So typically I find that these calls go best is I just want to learn a little bit more about your business, where you're trying to take things, and some of the challenges that you're currently running into right now. From there, we could talk about, a little bit more on the forward-facing side of where you're trying to take the business and some of the goals that you have. And then if it makes sense, I can run you through some of the solutions that we can provide. Worst case scenario, we have a pretty robust referral network, and we can probably find someone in our network to help you find a solution that you're actually looking for. Does that sound fair? And then from there, I always like that little sentence at the very end. Sound fair? Because that sound fair is just getting them to buy in. And every time they are going to say, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Okay? Unless you get someone that's major alpha energy. But for, I would say 90% of your cases, that frame will work. People will agree to the terms of the call. And then you can move into your discovery. Once you set the frame, then we move into something called current state. Now, current state is what I call like the collection of data stage. We're looking for certain data points. We're looking for where the business is currently at, some of the challenges that they're currently running into, and just take some practice getting all of the main things that you need to understand if you can actually help them fix the problem. But there's a really simple framework, and I can't remember what book I pulled this from. This is not my framework. It's called the BANT framework. And if you're just starting off in sales, this is a really nice framework to follow because it's really simple. 4-letter acronym. If you're a legend in sales and you're like, oh, man, that's a rookie. Okay, remember, some people here are just getting started, so don't be an ass. Current state, BANT, okay? B stands for budget. So you have to know if they can actually afford what it is that you are servicing. So a lot of times we'll ask questions around how much revenue are they generated, and some people are a little bit cautious when asking monetary questions. Don't be. It's only weird if you make it weird. That's kind of my rule around money. Like for me, like I'll just come out and ask like, cool, how much revenue are you guys generating right now? If you want to add a little softener in there, you can. I like just for context. That's one of my favorite softeners to a tough question of, hey, just for context, how much revenue is the business generating right now? Okay. A lot of times from revenue or even headcount, you can understand if that prospect is actually going to be qualified for your service. That's budget. Okay. A is going to be authority. Okay. So is this person actually the decision maker? And am I going to pitch to this person, or do I need to get a decision maker on the call? My favorite question specifically for this revolves around team hierarchy or team structure. So normally I'll ask a question somewhere along the lines of, well, how is the team currently structured? Tell me a little bit more about how the team's currently structured. And they'll be like, oh yeah, like I have a co-founder, I'm the CMO, there's a CEO involved, right? If you get those, then chances are you need that other decision maker on the call. And you probably shouldn't push for the sale there, because they're gonna have to go back and check with that person anyway. Sometimes, and we can check in on this, sometimes that person does have decision-making power, but in most cases, probably not, okay? So budget, authority. N is for need. Now, this is the hardest part of discovery, which is actually finding the need and building something called the gap, all right? And the gap simply talks about where they're currently at, and then where they're eventually trying to go. And we'll get into the desired state in just a second, but we have to understand where they're currently at and the need for the service. So if they're struggling with lead generation, if they are struggling with sales, if they're struggling with fulfillment, okay, those are the need points that we need to really dig deep on and ask a lot of why questions around, of like, why is that currently the problem? What have you tried to fix it in the past, right? And we have to dig in deep there and actually figure out why the problem is a problem and what the problem is. So need is really important. We need to figure out what the need is. That's going to be the most important thing that you ask during this structure. And then the last thing is going to be timeline. Yeah, so when are they looking to fix the problem? Now, if we can get those four things, normally your discovery will be in a really good spot. Now, it is structured in the BANT framework of budget, authority, need, timeline. That does not mean that that is the order that they go in. A lot of times you're going to start with something called a problem first syntax or a challenge first syntax. You're going to probably want to start in the challenge first and then be able to gather the other data around that. That's what I've found to work best for me, but you might have a different strategy there. But that budget, authority, need, timeline, if you can do those four things in your data collecting stage of current state, you're going to be in a really good spot to move into desired state. That is our second point, which is going to be desired state. Where do they want to be? So we have a good idea of where they're currently at now, which is one side of the bridge. The other side of the bridge is, well, where do they want to go? And that's what's going to draw our gap in between where they're at and where they're trying to go. So where do they want to be and how quickly do they want to get there? That is going to be what is considered like our anchoring point into, cool, well, up until this point, you haven't been able to solve this problem quite yet, right? And so insert our solution to help bridge the gap between where they're currently at and where they're trying to go. And once we have a good understanding of where they actually want to be, then we move into something called cost of current state, which is that outcome is pretty specific, right? So say we have a client that's sitting at $50,000 per month. They're wanting to get to $100,000 per month, and that's a $50,000 gap, right? That they're trying to fill. So $100,000 per month, that's pretty specific. What can you do at $100,000 per month that you can't currently do at 50? And then they're going to give you some really good fuel of, well, I'll be able to hire, I'll be able to bring in some more team and then be able to get myself out of this role. Okay, well, why is getting out of that role? And this is where some more why questions are sprinkled in there to find the real reason. Okay, well, why do they want to bring on employees? Well, then I can work on higher leverage activities for the business. Okay, why do you want to work on higher leverage activities for the business, right? And we just continue to dig until we find that one thing. And normally that one thing of that cost of current state, we'll hear a little bit of a tone shift, right? And a lot of times it's more of like an emotional trigger of, oh, well, I want to be able to work on higher leverage items because I want to be able to retire my wife, right? And sometimes we'll hear this like tone shift and a more serious tone taken of, this is the real reason why I want to get the business to this level. Yeah, that's when you know you've done a really good job of building that gap and then also being able to talk about their cost of current state. And then from there, we could talk a little bit about consequence. Consequence is one of those balancing acts, I always feel like, where you can either do consequence in a really, really good way, or you can completely jade the client and turn them off. So if you're not quite used to asking consequence questions, then potentially lay off for the time being. But one of my favorite ones is, and do you feel like the XYZ problem, right? So for this, it might be like lead generation for them to get to $100,000 per month. Do you feel like lead generation is going to be the thing that keeps you from getting your wife retired? That's a consequence question. And a lot of times they'll agree to that question. And they'll be like, yep, absolutely. Like, that's what needs to change. Okay, great. This is where we enter in with a breath of fresh air. Okay. Now, breath of fresh air simply talks about our ability to insert our service. Sometimes it's a little awkward to bring our service into the fold of like, cool, well, yeah, we can do that. This is what I like to do as far as breath of fresh air. Well, so-and-so, good news. We can definitely help with this. It's actually something that we've seen all the times with clients that are in a very similar position, just like yours. If you're open to it, I would love to share a little bit more about what we do and how we can specifically help you get from $50,000 per month to $100,000 per month, so you can create more bandwidth, more time within your team, get you out of the day-to-day fulfillment, and be able to retire your wife. How does that sound? You're like, yeah, I would love to hear more about that. Boom. Then you move into your offer and you're good to go. Okay. This is a really long daily ops boost. I normally don't do them this long, but hopefully that's helpful for you guys. Follow that framework. It's very, very helpful. Well, Tyler, can we put a little script in the notes for him potentially? Okay, cool. We'll put a script in the notes for you guys. That way you have a little framework to follow. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. Crew, if you love this Daily Ops Boost episode, you're gonna absolutely love our YouTube masterclasses that we're doing on YouTube right now. We're talking systemization, lead generation, sales, all on YouTube, all in a digestible format, so you guys can get the things that you need to scale your business effectively. We'll see you over there.